Let's talk a bunch of different topics.
How'd her career get there?
This is a podcast with Lauren Asghari.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening. Hit that like button, leave a positive comment, or hit subscribe to get alerted when new episodes drop. All of this will help keep the project going. Thank you for your support and enjoy the episode. This is the Lauren Asghari podcast, How'd Her Career Get There? And my guest today is Heather Bacher, who is the VP and team leader for Queenstown Bank. She also has several accolades. Most recently was named a Mid-Shore Woman to Watch and also a Top 100 Woman in Maryland by the Daily Record, and also participates and sits on numerous boards. So this will be an exciting conversation. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so let's start with present day, and then we'll get in our time machine and talk about Heather as a little girl. But okay. VP, team lead for Queenstown Bank, focusing on commercial banking. I would imagine that most of our audience that listens to this is familiar with what commercial banking means in the banking world, but maybe for those that aren't, for maybe some of our younger audience, just share a little bit about kind of what your role is currently, what some of your day-to-day responsibilities look like.
Sure. So I have a small team, and we are really focused on filling out the banking relationship and financial service needs of small businesses in our community. So Queenstown Bank is a small community bank on the Eastern Shore. We live here, we work here, we know our neighbors. So we're talking about, I have, a doctor that's building a new office down the street. And then, I've also done, the new yogurt shop that opened, in the middle of the community. So we're looking at how we can really help them achieve their financial goals and get where they need to be through any part of the life cycle of owning a business, which changes dramatically from startup to retirement.
And getting into banking, like when you were, we'll get in our time machine and go back a bit. When you were a little girl, I guess give a little bit of background story. Like, where are you from? Only child? What were you like as a kid?
Sure. So I grew up in Southern Delaware near the beach. I'm the oldest of two girls. My sister's 3 years younger than me. My parents were high school sweethearts and still, after 50 plus years, are still happily married most days. So yeah, it was great. I grew up with a very close family. We're probably a little codependent sometimes, but I'm really lucky that I grew up surrounded by my grandparents lived down the street. I was close to the beach, but ironically didn't go to the beach a lot because the tourists were always there. But yeah, that's kind of the high level overview.
I'm sure my family was one of those tourists for sure. We loved going to the beach. And what were some of your personality traits as a kid?
So, it's interesting. If you ask my sister, she'd probably have a lot of interesting explanations to give you. But I think because I was the oldest, I do think there's something about the birth order that just happens, whether you want it to or not. So I always was a leader. I always wanted to be in control. I was, my sister would tell you, so she's 3 years younger than me. She would tell you she didn't talk until she was about 5 because I always spoke for her. So I think that's kind of telling, but I was always just very protective. And I probably still, now that I'm 50, I'm still probably like that with her. But but it's a big joke in our family that she couldn't talk for many years because I would just, they'd be like, "Hi, nice to meet you. What's your name?" And I'd be like, "Her name is Melissa and she's 3 years old." And so I think that's kind of telling of how my personality is still now as an adult.
What, when you were a kid, were you into, let me ask you a different way. What did you aspire to do, like, as you got older when you were a kid? Like, were you, was 5-year-old Heather like, I want to go into finance and banking?
Absolutely not. She did not. She did not like math. I'm not sure that she still does like math, ironically, being in banking. But, this is a relationship business, not adding and subtracting necessarily. It's more relationship focused. But no, I actually, if I could have done anything when I was younger, I would have wanted to do two things. One, I would love to have been a travel agent because I just love to travel and I want to see as much of the world as I can. And I need to do a better job of that. Travel a lot, but I tend to go to like more local or the Caribbean, stuff like that. And this sounds ridiculous, but my family we went on a lot of cruises when we were kids, and I thought for sure I was going to be a dancer in one of the shows on the cruise ship. I was for sure that's what was going to happen. Not so much.
And so at what point did you realize that wasn't going to be a reality?
I mean, I probably in high school, right? Like, that's not really, what you're going to do. I think every little girl wants to be, a lot of them want to be famous and be on stage and all those things. But, yeah, I mean, I went to college. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. Well, technically my aunt did actually, but as an adult. So I was kind of like the first one that went to college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, to be perfectly honest. I was a communications major and just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I remember my dad said to me at graduation, I said, I just don't know what I want to do when I grow up. And at that time he was 50. And he said, well, I'm 50 and I don't know what I want to do when I grow up either. So I was like, okay, well, great. This isn't going to be good. So, back then in college, like job fairs were really big, and you'd put on suits and pantyhose and you'd go meet people and talk to them face to face. And that's what I did. I did a lot of job fairs and I talked to a lot of different companies. And I came across a bank that had a management training program. So I was going to be able to go in, learn every different part of the bank, work in all parts of the bank, understand it. And then I figured that's a great jumping off point. I'll figure out what I like the best, and then I can go do that. Almost 30 years later, I'm still in banking.
I feel like that's the thing that like people like early in their career don't necessarily realize is that you don't have to have like the path mapped out or clearly know what you want to do. It's like sometimes you stumble into something and then it's like, oh, these parts of that job like are really interesting to me. You just said a couple of things. I was like writing them down because I want to come back to them, and they're across a couple of different topics. But the first one, relationship banking. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, what does it take to be, a good commercial banker, right? Because a lot of people might hear like finance and banking, and they might jump to the conclusion of, oh, I don't like math. I'm not good with math.
Right.
But you said it. It's more relationship focused. So
yeah, it is. So I mean, I remember I got into commercial banking, probably about 20 years ago. I worked at a large bank, and they came and said, I was a branch manager, and they said, we want to really take some of our top branch managers and put them into business banking because we really want to be relationship managers and we want to look at all sides. A lot of times you hear commercial lender, and the old school version of that is I do a loan and I'm done. That's it. That's all. That's my job. But there's so much more to it now, right? And banks get a bad reputation because of the investment banking crisis and things that happen like that. That's not what community banks do, though. So, there's benefit to large banks, small banks, online banks. We all have pros and cons. I mean, I've done stuff through online only banks personally because it's just easy and I was able to do it. But when it comes to something important, I want to be able to sit down and talk to somebody. And that's what relationship banking is. You're not just coming in and cashing a check. I want to come out. I want to see where your business is. I want to tour it. I want to understand what you do, how you do it, how you get paid, and then how we can help you be more successful in whatever your financial goals are.
Yeah, and your role is really, tell me if I'm accurate when I'm saying focusing on the client services part. So when you think of finance, you have the client services where you're the one interacting with the customer. And then on the back end, you might have, your underwriters or your people that are really like, doing the deep math.
Doing the math.
Yeah, right. Well, your job's really to engage in the community, make people feel comfortable working with your bank, tell them options. When people are stressed out about money, you can kind of talk about options with them, right? That's the...
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I tell my customers all the time, like, I kind of look at myself, I'm the quarterback of the relationship for a business owner. So my primary responsibility is getting the loan request from start to finish, but I'm going to bring in our branch managers who are our business deposit experts. We have a cash management expert. I'm going to bring her in to help talk about fraud services. So I don't need to know everything, but I need to know enough about everything to be able to identify what will be helpful for my customer. And then I bring in the experts to help execute on those things.
I'm jumping around because you said two other things earlier, so I'm bouncing all over, I know. You said your parents were married for 50 plus years. What do you attribute that to, just as a kid observing?
That's going to make my eyes wet. I think they're just a good team. They've always been a good team. Even now, don't get me wrong, they like to bicker. And I think that sometimes that is key to a healthy relationship. But they grew up together. They took on roles that, I think a lot of times, especially, in the I am woman, hear me roar kind of era that we tend to be in, like I can do everything myself. I can't, right? And they're, they know there's certain things my mom's better at, certain things my dad's better at, and they do those things together and they get there, and they always showed up for us all the time.
I love that. What a testament, like any parent. I mean, this, your mom, for your kid to say something so kind about you many years later, like what a testament to what good parents you have.
Yeah. They're just good human beings.
Yeah. What was the one or two traits as a kid, and it can be from your parents or other influential, figures in your life, but what are the one or two traits from your childhood that you remember, like, I learned this from this person and it has stuck with me or served me well throughout my life?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think one thing that comes to mind is my grandmother, who is 96 years old and still gracing us and leading our family. She was married to my grandfather for many years before he passed away, and he had started a business, and everything back then was male dominated, right? But especially they owned a teleprompter business. And so they worked in DC with a lot of, political events, stuff like that. And she went to an event one time, and they basically were like, we're going to need to talk to your husband. Well, even back then, she said, oh, no, you're not. I'm in charge here and you can talk to me. And that always kind of stuck with me, that like, no, like you can do that. You can, push yourself front, and whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't really matter. We all deserve the same amount of respect. So I always thought that was a pretty cool story.
That is, especially for that time when it was, to your point, women just didn't do that. It was not the societal norm.
Yeah. I mean, they kind of sat in the back and did, the paperwork, and, they were seen and not heard kind of thing. And no, she's always stood up for herself as a woman, even back then. So that always kind of stood out to me.
I love that. Very special. What did it mean to you to be the first one in your family? We'll put an asterisk by your aunt, but the first one in your family to graduate college.
At the time, it meant more to me than probably people, even in my family, thought. Like, I was like, this is kind of a big deal. No one's done that. I remember my aunt, who I had a pretty good relationship with, you only get so many tickets to graduations when, you have those. And I made sure that she got one of them because I felt like it was important. We had a lot of parallels in our life. Even now as an adult, I did with her before she passed away. So seeing that then, I didn't realize kind of the foreshadowing it was going to have for later, kind of the similar paths that we took, just personally and professionally. So I felt like I was, setting a good example for, people that were coming behind me. And I have younger cousins and siblings, and college isn't for everyone though. So for me, it worked out great. But, my sister did not go to college, but she's a very successful business owner. So finding your niche is just what's important.
Yeah. When you, so you graduate college and you go into, you get a job at a bank, and then talk through kind of how you started there and kind of your career. I'm going like this, but I'm sure it wasn't necessarily quite like that, as nothing in career seemed to be.
Definitely, sometimes take a step backwards to take two steps forward. But, and that actually happened fairly early in my career. And I feel like it was a pretty mature decision at the time, considering I was probably in my early mid-20s. So, we went through this management training program. You learned everything about the bank and kind of figured out where you fit. And I was going to go into branch banking. So I came out, the program was about 9 to 12 months. And I came out as a branch manager. So, I mean, you're talking, I was like 23, 24, and I'm running a branch. I talk about imposter syndrome. I was like, do not know what I'm doing, no matter what I learned the last year. It was very intimidating because I had to go in there and be in charge. And there was a really good leader in one of our other retail branches that was going and opening. We were opening a brand new branch in Canton. in Baltimore. And he was going there to open that branch and be the branch manager and was looking for people to go there. And I reached out and I said, hey, like, do you need an assistant? Like, I know I'm a branch manager, but I needed to take a step back, and I felt like I could learn a lot from him. So I did that. And that was actually a really good decision for me, because I was able to go into, I was able to see a branch open from the ground up and be able to help grow it, but learn from someone who had more experience that was actually taking the time, to help me become a better banker. So that was a really good choice for me. And then a few years later was when the whole conversation happened that some of our executive management in Baltimore said, we want to get some of these branch managers in here because we don't want just lenders. And I honestly didn't want to do it. At first, I said, I don't want to do it. I don't like credit. I don't like underwriting. It's just not my thing. And they said, I know, but we really think you can do this. And I was like, all right, well, sometimes when you ask to do something, you just need to try it, even if you're scared of it.
Mhm.
So I did. And that was, probably about 20 years ago. And I've been in, I've had smaller teams, larger teams, been at different size banks. But it's always the last, 15 to 20 years has been focused on business banking or commercial banking, but dealing with small businesses in some fashion. And I really liked when I got to the point when I was managing teams, because that's what I like the most, actually, is like seeing people get better and move up in their careers. I like being part of that.
What do you think it takes when managing teams or being a leader? Like what traits do you think it takes to be a good one? And what traits do you think have the opposite effect? Or even things like, as you're like, and maybe another lens look at the question is, even when I feel like everybody, when they become a manager, makes missteps and kind of learns along the way.
Yeah.
So maybe, what traits are make a good manager, and what traits maybe are harmful, and then maybe a personal story about time that you did something really great, or like, oh geez, I messed that up with that person.
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the best things any manager or leader can do is be a really good listener. And I've had to work on that. I even joke now with, sometimes I'll go out on a call with, someone on my team, and I'll say, look, I'm going to do everything I can to not take over this conversation and let you lead it. But if I do, just like kick me under the table. I'm very well aware of it. But I think you have to allow people to make mistakes sometimes. And by that, I mean, sometimes, somebody may come to you with an idea about a different way to do something, rather than jumping to, I think that's stupid. We shouldn't do that, right? Listening to what the case is, why. And then even if you think, you kind of do this with your kids too sometimes, right? You think like, okay, I don't think that's a good idea, but I'm going to let you do it and see how that works out. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But either way, you're going to learn something in the process, right? I find it very important to get to know my people and what's important to them. Funny, quick story, I think a lot of people know about, the Pavlov's dog theory and stuff like that. And went to work for a bank, and I was managing a group of men who were all older than me, significantly older than me. So it was, a little bit awkward how that was going to go. And one of the things I asked them to do was write down what were their favorite things. Like, look, everyone likes money, right? Who doesn't want more money? But like, tell me, like, what kind of candy bar do you like? What are your snacks? Stuff. So if I wanted to reward somebody, I was going to reward them with something they like. So they kind of laughed about it, and like, I'm sure thought I was crazy. But something really great happened with one of them, and I gave him a Snickers bar. And they had worked together so long, they all liked Snickers bars. So it kind of became a thing, like, okay, when something happened, I actually went to Sam's Club and bought a big pack of Snickers bar because it worked. Well, fast forward a couple months and something happens, and one of them comes to me and was like, where's my Snickers bar? Don't you think that was worth a Snickers bar? And I was like, oh my gosh, it worked, right? It worked. But, a lot of times we reward people and based on what we think we want, but that's not necessarily what they want. I had someone on my team one time that did something really great, and she was a support person. And I called the president of the bank. It was a small community bank. You could do that. And I said, look, I really would like you to make a phone call to her and just, express your appreciation for what she did. She really went above and beyond. He did do that. she was so uncomfortable and so nervous. Like, I don't think it motivated her at all. Cause that, like, for me, that would motivate me. But for her, it made her uncomfortable. It scared her probably a little bit. She did not want any part of that. So I think learning that and really getting to know your people and what they value. I think challenging parts, people that are maybe not the best leaders are the ones that talk at you, that tell you what to do, that aren't in the trenches with you. A lot of times they're telling you what, just do this because I said so kind of thing, and just talking at you rather than, okay, let's talk about, we have a project we need to do. What's the best way to do it? Let's leverage each other's, strengths and weaknesses. And when you have experts in, I found myself at a bank one time where we were in the local market and the bank was managed from somewhere that was not local. It was a larger bank and it was post-merger. And they were in a totally different state. And not only is the Eastern Shore, is Maryland a different state, but the Eastern Shore is very different than Baltimore or Annapolis or metropolitan areas. And those managers did not listen to us about what the local market needed and what they wanted. And that became a real challenge for the bank to get the traction that they needed. And ultimately, a couple of us left because of that, because we felt like we couldn't deliver what we wanted because they weren't taking the time to understand who we were and who our market was and who our community was.
I love every single thing that you just said about leadership. I'm going to tell my editor to clip that because I think that you just hit on so many of the big highlights. It's like everybody's different. Rewards don't have to always be some crazy big thing. It's sometimes just a little bit of recognition and seeing the individuality in people is important.
Yeah.
Not talking at them, right? And giving people a little bit of room to make the mistakes and learn from their mistakes. I think about that a lot in my career. When I earlier on, I was so focused on doing things right based on a judgment of somebody above me. There's a right way to do it. And then one day I just realized oh my God, there's 10 different ways to do this. It's not
right.
Their way isn't always the right way. My way isn't always the right way. There's 10 different ways to accomplish something. What's the best way to do it? And sometimes you just learn that by trial and error.
Yeah.
And your styles are different,
Correct. You need to know what motivates people because it's different for everybody. And, if I was given that guy, I don't know, a Hershey's bar and he didn't like chocolate, he wouldn't have come back and been like, hey, I want another Hershey's bar, but he wanted a Snickers.
I love everything you just said there. What, including the Snickers, those are always good. What for you, if you look back at your career, what would be something a pivotal moment for you? Do you remember a moment where you did something and you learned well, I'm not going to do that again, or you walked out of a meeting and you were that was a regret, lesson learned, won't do that. And
Right.
with the asterisk of, there's no regrets. Every time that you do something, you learn something from it, but something that you're okay, that was a real business case that made me change perspective.
I have, I think I have a pretty good example. Well, I have two. My first one's really quick. I remember I was really young, still, probably in my 20s, and went to a meeting and I got so passionately involved in a conversation about something. I remember we were in a boardroom and I started crying. And I walked out and I was like, oh my God, what did I just do? They're all going to think I'm weak. Why did I let them get to me? And at the time, right? I mean, we're talking probably 20 years ago, things were different. I think now in 2026, it's okay to show, that your emotions about things, to an extent. I'm not saying I want to sit around and cry at work anymore, but I was just so passionately involved. And it's different now than it was then, because, you think you have to be strong and put on, say all these right things. And sometimes things are that important that, you get worked up about it. But the real, a real good example, I think, is I interviewed for a job that I had kind of been training for, and I had been talking about that I was interested. This position ever came open. I was interested. And so that position came open. And I thought for sure I was getting it no matter what happened. And no matter who else interviewed for it, I felt like I was going to get the job. So I went in and I did the interview and I didn't get the job. And I was just beside myself. How could I not have gotten the job? So I went back and talked to the hiring manager and I said, I really feel like I was ready for this job and this was kind of my next step. And I would just like some feedback on why I wasn't selected. And the feedback I got was the other person that was hired, who was a man, came in very confident and sure of himself and literally said, I can do this job and here's why. And I didn't exude that exact confidence and didn't say those things. And I thought, you don't want to be too confident. You don't want to act too it's always kind of a dance with those kinds of things. But what I learned from that is you have to be confident. You have to lean in and speak up for yourself. You have to tell people what you're good at because sometimes they don't see it. And if you want something, you have to tell them. No one's in your head. There was another job that I wanted, fast forward probably 15 years. And I was working for a bank that acquired another bank. And based on where I lived geographically, I could get to that new bank pretty easily. So I went to my boss and said, hey, if there's any opportunities in the midst of this merger, I don't know if you realize, but I'm actually only like a half hour from one of their offices. Like I could easily, be a great part of this process, I think, and help with it. So they ended up needing someone to go into that market as a team leader, and I got the job. And a very good friend of mine, who I'm still very good friends with to this day, afterwards called me and said, I don't understand how you got that job over me. I mean, I live closer to Delaware than you do. And I said, well, first of all, I was taken back because she was a good friend of mine, but good enough that we can actually be that honest, I guess. Yeah. And I said, did you tell anyone that you were interested? And she was like, well, no, why wouldn't they just ask me? And I said, well, no one's going to ask you. Like that. I'm not saying I was better or more qualified than her. I just spoke up for myself and let people know what I wanted. And that was the differing factor for me. So you got to tell people what's in your head because they're not in there to hear it.
That is such an impactful and I feel like an impactful story. So thank you for sharing. And I feel like that is something that comes up a lot, particularly if I'm making broad generalizations across genders. I think there's been studies shown on this, right? That somebody out there can fact check me on what I'm about to say, but it's something to the fact of like men will apply for a job if they're 80% qualified. Women will apply for a job if they're 110% qualified.
Yes.
Like there's something about that. And then there's also something in research where women, where they're more likely to assume that people recognize what they're doing and will just say, oh, well, Heather's been doing this, so let's go to Heather for the job. Right. Versus, men will kind of raise their hand. And again, that's a broad gender generalization. But the point is that what you said there, I think a lot of women have lived through or experienced. And I think that's a really, really important thing to highlight. And I also love that when you didn't get the job, which I'm not sure how many people would do this, when you didn't get the job initially, that you went back and you asked, hey, I wanted that. Like, where did I fall short? I don't know how many people would do that either.
Yeah. And I think it's important to do that. I mean, sometimes you might hear something you don't want to hear, but it gave me such clarity on how I just showed up in that interview. It's not that those things weren't true. I was just as qualified, probably more qualified than him, but I just didn't articulate it in the right way and have enough confidence. And as women, I think sometimes we're afraid to be too confident. We're afraid to be too right? Because we're too bossy. I mean, unfortunately, there are just things out there that are still some stereotypes that, I could say one thing and, a man could say it and the explanation of, the approach would be completely different. I do think that that's obviously changing and I feel very fortunate. I've always, for the most part, have worked for really great leaders, men and women. Mm-hmm. And some of the greatest leaders I've worked for and people I've learned have been men. Mm-hmm. So, it's interesting. Sometimes women can be our own worst enemies. I mean, I had a woman that I worked with one time that I ultimately left a bank because of the friction between her and I. And I think we all know these people. Like she wasn't a girl's girl. I hate to use that term, but she was intimidated by me because she had been like kind of the woman in charge and like at the highest position in that market for so long. I wasn't there to challenge her. I was there to help her and complement, whatever we needed to do to get the job done. But some women get intimidated by that, so they don't support each other, which can be very challenging.
Well, it's interesting you say that because there's also, gosh, where was I? I was at some conference and it was a organizational psychologist that was talking about this point, but it was basically like if you have, 10 people in the room and you're one of like the others, right? And the others can be typically it's gender related females or maybe a person of color, right? But it typically does not work the other way where like, a man in any way is the other in the room, right? So just for the sake of this organizational psychologist. But the point that the person was making is that to your point, you can often be your own worst enemy in the sense of if there's 2 seats at the table for the other, for the women in the room and the rest are men, then those women, instead of lifting each other up to make it 4 seats in the room or 5 seats in the room, will look at it more competition and put each other down so that they get one of those 2 seats. Right. So I think that's something, that when we look just across the board, and I'm with you, I've had fantastic managers who are, who have been, men and advocates. So this isn't even a gender comparison necessarily, or by any means trying to knock men down. But it's just that thing of like, rising, what is that? I don't know, something about rising all tides.
I know what you're talking about. Some other rising tides lift all the boats or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you. So there is something to be said for that and really being an advocate for, for one another. And I love what you said about speaking up. I think that's really important and great advice for anybody in their career, regardless of gender or where you are in your career, is being an advocate for yourself and raising your hands.
And really finding people, personally and professionally that support you. I started a few years ago. I don't know if you've ever read the Lean In book by Sheryl Sandberg, but it's a great book if you haven't. And she has a whole nonprofit and a website, and there's these Lean In circles all over the world. And so we have kind of a hybrid of that. We call it like our little Lean In circle, but we're not necessarily following it, exactly the way it's defined. But once a month, it's a very small group of us. There's 4 of us. We all do very different things, but once a month we get together and just talk about what's going on in our lives. How can we help each other show up better at work, personally, professionally? And I was going through some personal stuff and I went, to this meeting one month and I said, I don't feel like I'm showing up at work. I know I'm not because I'm distracted by the stuff that's going on and I don't know what to do, or, I was in a room and I was made to feel like X, how would you have handled it? And it's been really, really helpful for me because you get sometimes having someone in the company you work for like that has its benefits too, but this is just on a little bit different scale. You kind of have your own personal board of directors, and that's been really helpful for me over the last few years.
Yeah, and I think that and I want to get into this with you, kind of the integration of career and family, but I think it's also nice to have people that you can go to. And again, I'm not trying to like. I don't want to come across of trying to make a gender divide in any way in what I'm trying to say. But there is a difference between being a man in business and being a woman in business, right? Just
sure.
And the responsibilities that come outside of the house, they come inside of the house that are maybe put on by society, right? Or whatever, historical or society norms. So all that to say, I think there is something really, and to your point earlier about communication, how people come across. Does it sound bossy? Does it sound bitchy? Or, how are they coming across? And to have people that have similar experiences to you to be able to relate and say, oh yeah, I've done that, or I've dealt with that, and this is how to handle it. I think that's tremendously valuable. It's almost like getting your tribe or group of people that can really relate to the nuances of kind of your life or work life integration.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very important.
Speaking to that a little bit, speaking to the audience out here who does have a work-life integration, when I say that, they're career focused, career driven. Maybe they, also have kids, or they have a, parent that they have to care for. But how do you kind of, I don't like the word balance, so I'm going to say integration. but just throughout your career, kind of that integration of being ambitious in your career, but then also, being a parent.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you say that. I actually was recently interviewed for an article, and that was a question that came up. And I said, everyone talks about work-life balance. There's so many webinars and things. You will be much better off when you realize it doesn't exist. At any given point, you're going to be giving one more attention than the other, and it's okay. Like, lean into that, but be aware of it, and just know, and it's okay that some days I'm going to have to put more into work. I think for so long I was like, what's this work-life balance? And I just don't really think it exists. It's just different. But I think for me, I made that decision early in my career when I had my son, and I knew that I was not going to sacrifice being there and being present and showing up for him throughout the last 18 years. Now that he's getting ready to go off to college, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I owned it, and I led with intention with that. And so I was very direct with the people that I worked for and the people that worked for me. I was very transparent about it. If it was field day, I would put on my calendar, 2 to 5 on Friday, I'm going to be at field day. If you need me, you know where I am, you can call me, but I'm not going to apologize because I want to show up for my kid. I've been here at Queenstown for a little bit over a year. And, when I was interviewing, I said, I just need you to understand, I'm going to need you to be flexible and understand that, this is my son's senior year of high school I'm getting ready to go into. He plays soccer. I'm not missing a game, and I have to have flexibility to do those things. And I've never had anyone say, no, you can't do that. Why? Like, no, we don't want you to do that. Like, you can't be there for your kid. But you have to just be transparent about it. A lot of times people are afraid to be. And so, like, they sneak out of the office, then you don't know where it creates a lot of problems. And when I took that job I referenced earlier, where I had some older gentlemen working for me, who I learned a lot from, but I went in there and I told them that. I said, look, you're always going to know, it'll be on my calendar. I'm very transparent. And I said, I expect you to do the same thing. And they're like, well, no, we don't have kids. Our kids are all grown up. And I was like, well, yeah, but do you have grandkids? Like, you should feel like if you want to go, if your grandkid has a, preschool graduation or, whatever it might be, or you have a parent that you need to take care of, you need to show up for your people, because if you can do that, you will be more productive at work. And I think it was a different way of thinking for them. But they did start to do that a little bit. So I just think you have to let people know that that's important to you. And if someone doesn't value that, then that's probably not the right place for you to be.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight for our audience another through line that I'm noticing in talking to you, which I think is something that people should emulate and pay attention to, is your assertiveness, and just going back to the story that you shared earlier, just being, direct with what is important to you and what matters, and that often people will respond to that in a positive way.
Right.
And just, that again, you raised your hand and said, hey, this is what's important to me and what matters.
Right.
So I want to highlight that for our audience, because that's been a through line, and
Yeah.
it's served you well.
Yeah. It's very important to be direct, but thoughtful and considerate. Right. I think that's important. I have a guy that's on my team now who I just think the world of. He's so great, but he'll call me and be like, well, what do you think about this? And I'm like, well, what do you think about it? Because, I'd like him to get there. And I finally said to him, I said, you've been doing this for a long time. You know this information. Like, you know what the best rate is. So you tell, what do you think it is? And own it. And I'm going to probably 99% of the time, I'm going to agree with you. But you need to trust that, you've been doing this a long time and have confidence in what you're doing. And it's not, you're not pushing back or being, you're just showing that, using this, you've been doing this for a long time, use the skills that you've learned, and you can make the decision just as easily.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Empowering your employees to do that. That's another great leadership trait. What is something that, if you were early in your career, what advice would you give your younger self?
Well, that's a good question. I would say, if I could go back, I would tell my younger self to follow where your passion is and find something that really will make you feel good about what you're doing every day. And I'm not saying that I don't. I've been in banking for almost 30 years. This is just what I do. I've been doing it so long. I don't know how to do anything else. But I do sometimes see people that are very intentional about whatever their career is because it revolves around a passion of theirs. For instance, my sister is a dog groomer. She owns a dog grooming salon. She loves animals. And I think it's amazing. She's made a career out of something that she loves. She gets to go work with dogs every day. I love what I do, but I would not say that it's my biggest passion in life, right? So, my son's getting ready to go to college, and we've been talking about majors and what you want to do, and he knows that he's very artistic, and he wants to really do something where he can be creative, but he doesn't want to be an art teacher because he said, I want to make money. And it's funny, I told his art teacher that, and she said, he's right. This is my community service work. But we were able to work through and find, so he's getting ready to go to college. He's going to major in product design. So that's going to allow him to use those skills that I think will last him, and he'll be able to find a career that he will really enjoy because he's passionate about that art and creativity.
Got it. Love it. Love it. Do you, I have one more question before I get to rapid fire. But
Okay.
before I do that, actually I have two more questions. Let me sneak this one in. From a networking perspective, and again, picture the audience for this question being people that are earlier in their career, or people that are making maybe a career change, or people who just don't have like a lot of relationships, business relationships. What advice do you have for them, like for meeting new people, or, going to a network event, you're there, maybe, you're a little introverted. Like, how do you start just a business relationship or network?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's hard. And I think some people naturally can just, I fortunately it's just a natural skill. Like I can go into any room and I can feel comfortable. I don't care if it's the president of the bank calling me or the janitor. I feel, but that's not how it is for everyone. So, my recommendation would be find a buddy, right? Find someone that you feel comfortable with, and maybe even ask them, say, hey, I'm going to this event. I see you're going, or invite them to go with you and just say, look, I'm trying to meet some new contacts. How have you done this? And maybe they may be able to introduce you to people if you let them know what you're looking for and being very specific. And set a goal when you go into an event, right? Like it's very easy, especially, for someone like me at my point in my career. I've lived here for almost 20 years. I go to a networking event. I know most of the people there. It's very easy to go into a kind of standing in the corner and catching up with your business friends, right? Rather than meeting new people. So I've always had a goal of, when I go into an event, try to get 2 business cards of people that I didn't know before I went there. Just 2. And then I call them, and ask them to have coffee or something and just learn about what they do. And then the other thing I would say is, just don't be afraid. Most people that are going to a networking event, whether they're introverted or extroverted, there's probably multiple people in that room that feel the same way that you do. So don't be afraid to just go up and be like, say, hi, introduce yourself, what brought you here? Come up with some standard question that, the weather's beautiful, whatever it might be, right? To just start that conversation. And then relying on people that to kind of tell them who you want to meet and make connections.
Yeah, and I think you highlighted another really good point in there. Like, I'll call it like slow play in the relationship. You're not trying to sell somebody the first time that you meet them. That never feels good. So making it a casual, like, hey, let's catch up sometime, and then building from there. All right, I have one more question before we get to rapid fire. But before I ask that, are there any topics or anything that you want to cover that we have not yet covered?
No, I don't think so. We covered a lot.
All right. And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
So the best way to get in touch with me is I'm very active on LinkedIn. So you can very easily find me on LinkedIn. There's not a lot of Bachers out there, fortunately. So I'm usually pretty easy to find. Also, you can reach out to me on our website. There's all contact information's there, but my email is just hbacher, Bacher at queenstownbank.com. Or they can call me directly on my cell phone is 410-490-3285. Text me, call me, whatever. If I'm not available, I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
All right, perfect. And we will link that up in the show notes also. All right, last question before we get to rapid fire. How do you define success?
Oh, that's a good question. I think my greatest form of success is seeing things that I've done and impacts I've made improve, whether it's improving our community, whether it's improving someone that's worked for me that now has a new job, and being able to accept mistakes along the way and learn from them, right? Not being afraid to say, actually, I don't know the answer to that. Like, let me get back to you. I never want to make up an answer for anything. But I had someone that worked for me and we had suggested her to consider a new job and she was not, she's, I can't do that. And we were all, yes, you can. So, I talked to her about why she could and why I thought she could. And she ended up applying for the job and she got it. And she's been really, really successful. So that to me is the best part, seeing, that impact that I've had, that from a, kind of personal perspective, but then, from a business perspective, I remember, I think I mentioned earlier, I did a loan for a yogurt place in town, and going to that grand opening, and I saw my client wanted to be a business owner and own their own business and making that dream come true, but then seeing all these people from the community, kids, parents, right, have a new place to kind of go and enhancing our community. Like, those are the two things kind of personally and professionally that define success for me.
Love it. Love it. Beautiful. All right, now we're going to go to rapid fire, unrelated to anything that we talked about. So just first thing comes to mind and maybe 6 or 8 questions.
Okay.
All right. Sun or moon?
Sun.
Dine in, dine out?
Dine out.
East, west?
East.
Astronaut or deep sea diver?
I don't want to do either of those. Astronaut.
Brick or stone?
Brick.
And the last one, coffee or tea?
Tea.
All right. I know the astronaut, the deep sea diver, everybody's always like, oh, geez.
Yeah, I don't want to do either of those things.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Well, Heather, thank you so much for the time and the conversation.
Yeah.
I think you dropped like just several gems in this that I know our audience is going to get value from. So thank you for sharing your story and being so open.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. It was great to talk with you. I've listened to some of your podcasts and I'm picking up on some new things by listening to those. So thanks for what you're doing.
Awesome. Love it. That's a good plug. I'm going to have my editor edit that too.
It's true. I have been.
All right. This is the Lauren Asghari podcast, How'd Her Career Get There? And again, my guest is Heather Bacher, and we will see you next time.
Let's talk a bunch of different topics.
How'd her career get there?
This is a podcast with Lauren Asghari.